In March 2007, 19-year-old Texas A&M freshman Tynesha Stewart came home to Houston for spring break. She was excited to attend a Beyoncé concert and see her family. She walked up the stairs to her ex-boyfriend's apartment to drop something off and vanished off the face of the earth. For the next 3 days, neighbors at the apartment complex noticed thick, black smoke, leaping flames, and a sickening, acrid smell coming from the man's balcony barbecue grills. When asked what he was cooking, he calmly replied, "I'm catering a wedding." The truth behind what was actually on those grills would completely traumatize the city of Houston. If you want to understand the extreme, dark reality of what happened to Tynesha and help ensure her brilliant life isn't eclipsed by the horrific way it was taken, stay with us. We are uncovering every detail of this harrowing case to protect her memory. Before we peel back the layers of this tragic story, please take a moment to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video. Keeping her memory alive is how we fight back against the darkness. Tynesha was born in 1987. She grew up in a tight-knit, protective home in the northern suburbs of Houston, raised by her mother, Gail Shields, and her sisters. Tynesha was the kind of child who filled a room without saying much. She had a quiet, steady warmth, but beneath that gentle exterior was an absolute powerhouse of a mind. While other kids were distracted, Tynesha loved structure. She loved logic, math, and solving complex puzzles. By the time she entered Nimitz High School, her ambition was clear to everyone. She didn't just pass her classes, she dominated them. In the spring of 2006, she graduated near the absolute top of her class. Her family wept tears of pure pride. She had a dream that was rare for girls from her neighborhood. She wanted to be a civil engineer. She wanted to design structures that would last forever. In the fall of 2006, that dream became real. She packed her bags and moved 90 miles northwest to Texas A&M University in College Station. On that massive campus, she finally tasted true independence. She made new friends, started learning who she really was, and began to thrive. But there was a dark anchor tying her back to Houston. His name was Timothy Wayne Shepard. When they first met, Tynesha was just a young teenager in high school, and he was already a grown man of 27. The age gap was a heavy, silent warning that no one fully understood yet. Timothy was an insecure, deeply controlling man. He watched Tynesha grow, watched her excel, and watched her get accepted into a prestigious university. He knew she was leaving him behind. The more she succeeded, the more he simmered with a toxic, quiet rage. On campus, away from his suffocating grip, Tynesha met someone her own age. In early 2007, she realized she deserved better. She officially broke off the relationship with Timothy. She was stepping completely into the light, leaving his darkness behind. She thought she was free. She thought a simple breakup would end it. She had no idea that back in Houston, Timothy was staring at his apartment walls, quietly nursing a deep, vengeful hatred, just waiting for the calendar to turn to March and for Tynesha to come home. The calendar on the wall read Thursday, March 15th, 2007. The Houston air was starting to warm up, thick with the promise of spring. For Tynesha, this week was supposed to be a beautiful celebration. It was a break from the heavy civil engineering textbooks, a chance to stay up late laughing with her sisters, and the pure excitement of going to see Beyoncé perform live in her hometown. She felt like a completely different person than the high school girl who had left for college just months earlier. She was growing up. She was finally free. But that afternoon, a dark shadow fell over her holiday. Timothy Wayne Shepard reached out to her. He wanted to see her. Just one last time, he pleaded. He claimed he wanted to talk through the breakup, to return some of her belongings, and to finally find some peace. Tynesha was a deeply logical person, a natural problem solver. She didn't want any lingering bad blood or anger, She truly believed that if she just went over to his apartment at 17710 Red Oak Drive, she could close this chapter of her life neatly, respectfully, and move on with her future forever. Before she left her friend's house that Thursday, she did something that still haunts everyone who loves her. She left her cell phone sitting on the table. It was an accident, a simple oversight of a teenager in a hurry. She looked at her friend, smiled, and said a phrase that now echoes through this case like a cold, terrifying warning. "I'll be right back." She walked out the door, leaving her only lifeline to the outside world behind. She was completely disconnected, walking straight into a quiet, suburban trap. Around noon, Tynesha walked up the concrete stairs to Timothy's second-floor apartment. The heavy door closed behind her, cutting off the normal, ambient sounds of the complex. A short time later, her younger sister felt a sudden, protective urge to check on her. Knowing Tynesha didn't have her cell phone, her sister dialed the landline inside Timothy's apartment. The phone rang, and Tynesha actually answered. Her voice sounded calm, normal, and steady. She confirmed to her sister that she was there, sitting with Timothy and just finishing things up. There was no screaming in the background. There was no panic in her tone. But that phone call was the absolute last time anyone who loved Tynesha would ever hear her voice. After she hung up that receiver, the line didn't just go quiet. It became a tomb. Inside that apartment, Timothy began pressuring her, demanding she reveal the details of her new relationship at college. He wanted to know who he was, what they did, and how she could move on so fast. Tynesha, refusing to be controlled any longer, remained quiet. Her silence only fueled his explosive, monstrous rage. Later, in a desperate attempt to justify the blood on his hands to the court and to community activist Quinnell X, Timothy claimed that Tynesha was the aggressor. He stated that she refused to answer his questions, suddenly grabbed a knife from a table, and approached him with it in her hand. He claimed she swung at him with the knife, nicking his fingers. Fearing she was going to stab him again, Timothy claimed he grabbed her around the neck with one arm while trying to disarm her with his other hand, and choked her to death out of pure, unbridled anger. He squeezed the life out of the 19-year-old freshman until her body slumped to the floor, lifeless and still. It was mid-afternoon on March 15th, 2007. Tynesha Stewart was gone, and the darkness in that apartment was only just beginning to spread. On the morning of Friday, March 16th, 2007, the sun rose over northwest Harris County, but inside apartment number 224, the darkness had completely taken over. Tynesha Stewart was dead. Her family was beginning to wonder why she hadn't called, entirely unaware that the brilliant 19-year-old was trapped in a nightmare that was about to become infinitely worse. Timothy Wayne Shepard was not panicked. He sat alone in apartment 224 with Tynesha's body, his mind pivoting entirely into a cold, systematic plan of absolute erasure. He knew he had to get rid of the evidence completely, and he knew exactly what tools he would need to do it. Leaving her body on the floor, Timothy walked out of his apartment, got into his car, and drove to a local hardware store. He walked down the aisles calmly, selected a power jigsaw, paid for it, and drove back to the complex. When he returned to the apartment, he dragged Tynesha's body into the small, confined space of his bathroom. What happened next, inside that bathroom, is deeply harrowing. Timothy completely undressed Tynesha's body. Standing over her in the bathtub, he plugged in the jigsaw. The loud, mechanical scream of the power tool filled the small apartment as he began to systematically dismember her limbs. He worked methodically for hours, using the saw and various other tools to break her body down into pieces small enough to destroy. To rinse away the mounting blood and drown out the sounds of his work, he left the bathroom water running continuously, letting her life force wash down into the drain traps. He even threw pieces of commercial chicken and animal ribs into the tub, creating a sickening physical alibi in case anyone caught a glimpse of the horror inside. but cutting her apart wasn't enough to hide the crime. On that same Friday, March 16th, Timothy walked out onto his second-floor balcony and realized his own small smoker wouldn't be enough. He walked over to his 18-year-old neighbor, James Hebert, a kid he regularly played video games and cooked out with, and asked to borrow Hebert's large, commercial-style barbecue grill, claiming he needed extra space for a massive cooking project. Hebert, completely unsuspecting, handed it over. Timothy lined up the two grills on his small apartment balcony. Throughout Friday night, Saturday, and into Sunday, March 18th, he kept the charcoal burning at an extreme, unnatural intensity. He took the dismembered remains of Tynesha from the bathtub, carried them out to the balcony, and placed them directly onto the open flames. He stood over those grills for 3 straight days, turning his residential patio into an active, makeshift crematorium. The air in the quiet courtyard quickly turned toxic. Thick, heavy black smoke began to billow constantly from Timothy's balcony, drifting directly into the open windows of neighboring apartments. The smell was not the rich, sweet scent of a weekend cookout. It was something entirely different. Heavy, greasy, and deeply sickening. Louis Evans, a neighbor whose balcony directly faced Timothy's patio, began to choke on the air. He looked out his window and saw massive, violent flames leaping dangerously close to the wooden roof of the balcony. In his verified statement, Evans later recalled the pure terror of those days, saying, "The smell was awful. I was wondering, what is he burning? Not cooking, but burning. There is a difference." The situation became so volatile that Evans's girlfriend called 911, fearing the entire building would catch fire. When the local firefighters arrived at the complex, Timothy calmly walked out onto the smoky balcony. The intense flames had temporarily settled into a low, smoldering heat. With complete composure, he looked the firefighters in the eye and assured them that everything was under control, that he was just cooking. The firefighters, seeing no active structural fire, turned around and left. They had no idea they had just stood feet away from a young girl's ashes. When other neighbors walked past the courtyard, holding their shirts over their noses because of the nauseating stench, Timothy didn't flinch. When James Hebert asked if he could have a piece of whatever was cooking, Timothy refused. He looked down from his balcony and casually whispered his lie, "I'm catering a wedding this weekend." For 3 straight days, a monster stood over an open flame in a crowded apartment complex, systematically burning away the future of a brilliant young woman. While the world passed by right beneath him, he believed he had won. He believed that without a body, there would be no crime, leaving her family to search for a ghost. By Monday, March 19th, 2007, the spring break holiday was officially over. Across Texas, college students were heading back to their lecture halls. But in the northern suburbs of Houston, a terrifying quiet had settled over Tynesha's family. She hadn't checked in. She hadn't packed her bags for the drive back to College Station. For a disciplined, focused civil engineering student who kept her life in perfect order, this absolute silence was a flashing red light. Her mother, Gail Shields, knew in her heart that something was terribly wrong. She picked up the phone and officially filed a missing persons report with the Harris County Sheriff's Office. The initial police investigation moved quickly, tracing Tynesha's final steps directly back to that concrete apartment complex at 1771 Red Oak Drive. When detectives first knocked on Timothy Wayne Shepard's door, they didn't find a trembling, panicked suspect. They found a man who was disturbingly calm, completely detached, and entirely cooperative. He admitted that Tynesha had visited him on Thursday to talk, but he claimed she left his apartment alive and well, walking away into the afternoon. His stories were smooth, but as detectives pushed further, the small details began to shift and blur. His timelines didn't match up. Yet, law enforcement hit a massive legal brick wall. There was no blood visible in the apartment, no signs of a violent struggle, and most importantly, no body. Without physical proof of a crime, they couldn't arrest him. Fearing that the case of a missing young black girl would quickly grow cold and be forgotten by the media, local community leaders and activists stepped in to keep the pressure mounting. On Wednesday, March 21st, prominent Houston civil rights activist Quinnell X entered the police station. Recognizing the psychological games Timothy was playing, Quinnell X was permitted to go into the interrogation room to speak with him privately, man to man. Inside that small, sterile room, the air was thick and heavy. Quinnell X didn't appeal to Timothy's conscience because he knew the man didn't have one. Instead, he appealed directly to Timothy's profound sense of self-preservation. He laid out the reality of Texas law, explaining that if the state found out what he did on its own, they would seek the ultimate punishment. That was the exact moment the monster's cold facade finally cracked. But Timothy didn't weep for Tynesha. He didn't shed a single tear for the 19-year-old girl whose life he had brutally stolen and burned away. He began to cry exclusively for himself, whimpering in fear as he realized his wall of lies had collapsed. Quinnell X later testified about this chilling, selfish breakdown, revealing that Timothy's only concern was escaping the lethal injection gurney. He kept crying, repeating the same desperate phrase, "I just don't want the death penalty." Under the suffocating weight of his own fear, Timothy broke. He looked up and began to whisper his confession, detailing the horrific events of the past week. He told them about the argument. He told them about his hands around her neck. And he finally told them he'd throw her body into a dumpster. The detectives listening through the audio feed felt a cold horror settle over the room. The mystery of where Tynesha had gone was finally over, replaced by a devastating, unbelievable reality that would traumatize the entire city. On Thursday, March 22, 2007, the horrific details of Timothy Wayne Shepard's confession leaked out into the public. A violent shockwave ripped through the city of Houston and tore across the campus of Texas A&M University. People stopped in their tracks, staring at their television screens, trying to comprehend what they were hearing. The news was not just sad. It was a deep, sickening violation of human decency. The sheer extremity of what this man had done to a 19-year-old girl in a quiet apartment complex was almost impossible for the human brain to process. Law enforcement moved immediately to find whatever physical evidence was left. Believing his initial lie that he had thrown her remains into the complex trash bins, detectives tracked the apartment complex's large commercial trash dumpsters to a massive, sprawling landfill in Humble, Texas. The county immediately began drafting a massive, desperate plan. They estimated it would cost over $500,000 to halt operations and conduct a meticulous, grid-by-grid excavation search of the mountain of garbage. They were willing to dig through tons of waste just to find any piece of Tynesha, any bone fragment that might have survived the fires or been thrown away in the aftermath. But as the forensic experts analyzed the timeline and the absolute intensity of the fires Timothy had kept burning for 3 straight days, a devastating reality emerged. He hadn't just thrown her in a dumpster, he had completely consumed her body on those grills. The dumpster was only used to discard the leftover ash, the melted fat, and the charred residue that remained after the fire had done its work. On late March 2007, Harris County Sheriff Tommy Thomas stood before a dense sea of news cameras and microphones. The air was thick with tension. He looked out at the reporters, his face grim, and delivered a statement that would serve as the most painful, emotional low point of the entire case. He announced that the massive landfill search was officially canceled. His exact words to a stunned, weeping community were short, flat, and completely terrifying. "There are no remaining body parts." The words hung in the air like ice. Timothy hadn't just taken Tynesha's life. He had achieved his monstrous goal of total physical erasure. He had turned a brilliant, living young woman into complete ash and smoke, scattering her into the Texas wind. This was the ultimate, brutal betrayal of the grieving process for Gail Shields and Tynesha's sisters. When a family loses a loved one, humanity grants them a sacred, ancient right, the right to a burial, a chance to hold a funeral, to dress them beautifully, to stand over a casket, to touch the wood, and to say a final, tearful goodbye before lowering them into the earth. Timothy maliciously denied them that right. There was no body to reclaim. There was nothing to place in a grave. He had forced this family to mourn a complete and total physical void. The community was left completely paralyzed by the horror. People looked at the beautiful photos of Tynesha smiling in her high school graduation cap, and then they looked up at the gray sky, realizing the brutal finality of what had happened on that second-floor balcony. A young woman who had done everything right, who had studied hard to build a future as a civil engineer, had been completely evaporated from the earth by a man who could not handle her success. The world felt colder, darker, and deeply unsafe, as everyone realized that the monster hadn't hidden her in the woods. He had burned her in plain sight while the neighborhood breathed in the smoke. In October 2008, the final battle for Tynesha Stewart began inside a packed Harris County courtroom. The state of Texas faced a massive, unprecedented legal hurdle. In almost every murder trial, the prosecution relies on a body, a medical examiner's autopsy report, and a definitive cause of death to prove a crime occurred. But Timothy Wayne Shepard's defense team sat at their table, ready to argue a cold, technical point. Without any physical remains, the state could not even prove that Tynesha was actually dead. They wanted the jury to believe that Timothy's confession was forced and that Tynesha had simply run away. They thought they had successfully exploited a loophole in the law by erasing her. But they had completely underestimated the meticulous, stubborn dedication of the forensic crime scene units. Investigators had gone back to that apartment at 17710 Red Oak Drive long after the smoke had cleared. They knew that while Timothy had spent 3 days burning her body on the balcony, he had processed her remains inside his small bathroom and kitchen. Forensics teams literally got down on their knees and completely dismantled the kitchen sink's plumbing. They pulled apart the pipes, unscrewed the U-bend drain traps, and sliced open the dark, heavy mechanisms of the electric garbage disposal unit. Inside the thick, black sludge that had settled deep within those pipes, investigators found the silent witnesses that Timothy could not burn away. Using tiny brushes and screens, forensic anthropologists discovered microscopic fragments of human bone and tiny pieces of Tynesha's teeth. It was a deeply disturbing, stomach-churning realization for everyone in the courtroom. Timothy had used his kitchen sink to wash away the final, unburnable evidence of his crime. But those tiny, indestructible fragments carried her DNA. They became her voice. In front of a completely horrified jury, the prosecution presented these microscopic pieces of bone, proving with absolute scientific certainty that Tynesha had never left that apartment alive. The trial concluded swiftly. The sheer, sickening weight of the forensic evidence, combined with the chilling, haunting testimonies of neighbors like Lewis Evans, left the jury with zero doubt. In October 2008, Timothy Wayne Shepard was officially found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 99 years in state prison and ordered him to pay a $10,000 fine. The courtroom was silent as he was led away in handcuffs, his face blank, realizing that his extreme, monstrous attempt to erase his crime had completely failed. But justice in a case this brutal is a heavy, complicated thing. A 99-year sentence does not bring back the light that was extinguished. Timothy tried to reduce Tynesha's entire existence to smoke, ash, and a horrific headline. But her family, her friends, and the community refused to let him win. We reclaim her name from the darkness of that balcony. Tynesha Stewart was not the smoke that choked the courtyard. She was a brilliant, ambitious 19-year-old powerhouse who broke through barriers to study civil engineering at Texas A&M. Her legacy is her intellect, her warmth, and the immense love she left behind in the hearts of her mother and sisters. We tell her story because she can no longer tell it herself, ensuring her name outlives the shadow of the monster who tried to erase her. Timothy Wayne Shepard tried to completely erase Tynesha Stewart from existence, but her name remains echoing through Houston. What do you think is the most haunting aspect of the neighbor's testimony? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Rest in peace, Tynesha.